So the next one is going to be a local GUI with Node and Express. As a reminder, it looks like this, and it's just a very simple front end that interacts with the Ollama API that's running on localhost 11434, which is actually very easy to remember because 11434 is llama. So I think they did that on purpose, but either that or it's an amazing coincidence. But why don't we take a look at the file here. In the repo, you're going to find all the files you need to run the Node server, as well as the interface. So let's take a look at how it's doing that. So we'll go over to the GitHub repo files here, and I'm using Axios for the API request, and then I'm using the default Ollama API. And I chose to use the generate endpoint, which is one of the default endpoints that you can use for Ollama, along with chat. Chat is another one that a lot of people use, but I actually found that I had better success with, or better responses using generate with the stream and chunking. And then all I'm doing here is I am pinging the Ollama API, and I'm giving it the model that I want it to run, as well as the prompt, and then I'm setting stream to true. And also I remember to set the response type to stream as well if you're doing that. Otherwise, if you don't do that and you set stream, all you're going to get is a gigantic stream of JSON objects, and that's not going to look very nice for your response. So all that is pretty straightforward. Why don't we just run through that really quickly? I already have this up, but it's just all you need to do is cd into the file, into the node directory that contains your server file, and just run that, and it will. There we go. It's working. And then all you have to do is, so it is working. Let's see. Okay. Why don't we ask the same question? How many eggs are in a dozen? This actually seems to be surprisingly difficult for the smaller models, but let's take a look. Okay, that is obviously wrong. Okay, so that is not the response we wanted, and as you can see, we were, I think, okay, it's because we were using a different model. We used, I think we used Q1, right? 2.5 for the CLI, and then we used Tiny Llama, which is a lot smaller. It's like, I think Q1's like about 4 or 5 times bigger. It's 7 billion parameters, so that's why the responses are better. But at least we validated that the Node server works and that the interface is correctly capturing the response or the prompt that I'm putting in, and it's correctly feeding the response back, and that the chunking worked, and that the chunking successfully took the stream and pieced it together into a complete response.
2 hours later.
All right, so now we get into the meat of it. This script allows you to take the stream of raw bytes from the Ollama API endpoint and convert it into UTF-8 text that is then iteratively appended to your final response, which is displayed on your UI. So basically what we want is this full response variable, which is returned to the HTML via string interpolation here. And then what we're doing is we're fetching it from the same API endpoint that we are sending the prompt to, right? Which we did over here. And so we want to make sure that the endpoints match. So for example, if you decide to use the chat endpoint for the Ollama API instead of generate, you want to go here and you also want to change this to chat, right? And so after you do that, you want to then, once you get the stream, you want to be able to read it, right? So here you set up the tools that allow you to read this raw stream before you can go on to the process of creating this creating the final response. So and so here we're creating the tool to read the stream, and the text decoder creates gives us the ability to convert the raw bytes into a text string, specifically a UTF-8 string, and then here we're setting up the loop where we use the reader that we just created here to read the stream, which it's reading. This reads the next chunk of the stream, and it returns an object which has the value, as well as this boolean which tells us whether the stream is done or not. And we want to make sure that we're also setting this async because we want to make sure that we finish reading the sort of next chunk before we create this object. So and here this is pretty important because this would tell us when the stream has finished, and when the boolean is set to true, the loop breaks, and we skip to the final response. Okay, and so moving on to some of the other parts. So we remember when we created the decoder here. Well, we're using it now to create a chunk that has been converted into UTF-8. So this value would have been in a I think it's a uint8 uint8 array, right? So this is in a uint array, and then we created the function, or created the object that allows us to convert it into a UTF-8. This is very important. You're gonna get some pretty bad responses if you don't do that. And so after that, we need to take the chunk that we just created, and we are separating it into lines so it's more manageable. And this just simply reads, because a lot of the servers, they append the double space to the end. This allows it to tell apart separate events, and that creates the separate lines. And all we're doing here is we're making sure we are skipping the empty lines, right? Empty lines minus the white space, and then we are making sure that we're only grabbing the data objects, right? Because we don't want any of the other stuff that comes with that huge JSON string. And so after we do that, this is also important because we want to make sure that from the data object that we are only grabbing the string and not the key as well, which is why we're removing that key. And then we're checking for if it's done, if the stream is done. And then let's see here. And once again, you probably get a better idea of this reading this yourself, but I just wanted to run through this pretty quickly because I thought, in case it's helpful to anyone. But right, okay, and so now we're taking the response and we are appending the newly converted chunk into the full response here. And then we're adding it to the unfinished response that appears in the HTML, which is why if you take a look at the what we just did here, right? If you take a look at this, right, waiting for the response, and then you'll see response, and then you'll see each chunk being added, right? And then you see the complete response, which is reflected here, right? Because each chunk is getting added, and then this is the full response after every iteration of the chunk getting added, which is why we saw that stream on screen, and that's why we only saw the response here. But once it finishes the entire response, that means the stream has finished, then we'll see complete response because it's exited the loop and now we are here, which is why, it's going to be sick of me asking it how many eggs are in a dozen. I've probably asked it a couple hundred times, but right, response, do you see that? And then once it has finished, you'll see complete response. And so that means we've exited the loop. And yeah, and that's it. That is your entire script. No, pretty simple, right? So yeah, great.